Today we review Ridley Scott's historical masterpiece.
Gladiator?
No, his other historical masterpiece.
Blade Runner?
That's not even history.
Not yet.
No, we're reviewing Ridley Scott's historical masterpiece, Kingdom of Heaven.
And since we wasted so much time on that bit, we have to cram in the rest of our material. John, hit us with that quick summary.
Kingdom of Heaven is a 2005 historical drama directed by Ridley Scott and written by William Monahan, starring Orlando Bloom, Ava Green, Jeremy Irons, and Edward Norton. It is the story of Balian of Eberlin, a French blacksmith who journeys to Jerusalem to find redemption for the soul of his recently deceased wife. Along the way, he intervenes in the crisis rising between the Catholic Templars and the Saracen Muslims, and defends the city from invaders.
We're gonna be blunt, it is bad. The pacing is sloppy, the character development non-existent, and even the action is choppy and poorly edited.
But Orlando Bloom's hair?
Even that is a mistake. Balian is a blacksmith in the Middle Ages. He wouldn't have access to hair products that make such luscious hair like that possible.
The film doesn't have an eye for historical accuracy, or any kind of accuracy, but it does nail a few points.
They only make the most basic of plot beats, like that Balian was appointed defender of Jerusalem. In fact, what they most got right just happened to be on accident.
The depiction of siege warfare mostly stays true to history, especially the use of towers and ballistic projectiles. However, when it comes to actually battle, it trips up a little bit.
Like for instance, Balian learns how to sword fight completely in the span of like a minute, because, you know, showing your protagonist learning a vital skill isn't something that needs to take a long time or feel earned in the slightest.
Actually, the depiction of the Battle of Hattin is portrayed true to life. The army of Jerusalem wandered the desert for several days after they abandoned their water source, and they paid the price of that mistake when they met the Muslims in battle.
And the scene where Balian knights 60 men in Jerusalem to raise morale before the battle, that actually happened, but it seems like it was only included in the movie because sometimes history reads just as well as one.
The only other thing they got right is that some characters in the movie existed at some point. With Kingdom of Heaven, history isn't really a source, it's more of a roadblock on the way to make a movie they wanted. The most egregious error is the most purposeful. Balian's birth and life leading up to the events of the film. While movie Balian is a bastard blacksmith in some village in France, the real Balian was a nobleman by birth who lived in Jerusalem. The idiocy behind making Balian a bastard is close second, because anyone who had heard of the Crusades before could have guessed that being an illegitimate son would reduce your standing to exactly zero.
They tried to turn the film into a fish-out-of-water plot, because if Balian was a noble in Jerusalem his entire life, then why would he need everyone else in the city to explain the conflict to him? Really, their only option was to bastardize the history, or they could write just clever dialogue that would allow the audience to figure out the plot, but I didn't direct Prometheus. What do I know?
Then there's the necessary romantic subplot involving Balian and Queen Sibylla, because it isn't like people would go to see a movie without a forced love story somewhere in the mix. As for the history behind it, Balian and Sibylla had no such close relationship, and even disliked each other, because they had supported different candidates in a succession dispute. Just one other inaccuracy to promote a more stereotypical movie.
As for Sibylla's husband, Guy de Lasagna, he was shown as an incompetent, malicious buffoon, because the film needed a villain. This stems largely from the effort not to vilify the Saracens, because of course Balian would promote 21st century progressive ideals of tolerance when he was warring against the Muslims for control of a religious and political stronghold. They couldn't make the obvious antagonist Saladin be a bad person, or even morally upright as the hero, because they decided their narrative before they decided to make it a good movie. so they picked Guy as a scapegoat.
The truth is, the Christians were brutal during the Crusades, but so were the Muslims. Every awful crime committed by one side was also committed by the other. For all the harm it did, the First Crusade had on Europe a very powerful effect that was so overwhelmingly positive for the film to declare that Europe was in the Dark Ages is either stupid or actively revising history for an agenda.
The end of the film would have you believe that after Jerusalem was handed over to Saladin, that the residents of the city were allowed to leave or stay as they pleased. Well, that's simply not true. Thousands of people were put into slavery because they could not afford their ransom, far from the benevolent and tolerant rule we were led to believe was in store.
That's nearly everything the film gets wrong, but if you thought the authenticity of the film was bad, just wait till you hear our opinions of it.
While the film dares to be a historical epic in the same vein as 300 and Gladiator, Ridley Scott fails to capitalize on his source material, the considerable talent of his cast, and his own skill as a director that he often forgets to include in his films. 4 out of 10.
The movie's pacing is fast to the point of nausea, and it becomes abundantly clear that Orlando Bloom cannot hold his own with people like Jeremy Irons and Edward Norton. It goes as far as to be politically motivated, but by inserting 21st century ideals into the Crusades, it kind of becomes preachy. I give it a 4 out of 10 along.
It is an immensely mediocre movie, neither being enjoyable enough to merit watching nor bad enough to skip entirely. The act structure is rushed and incoherent, and the writing for the characters is like Balian is painfully generic, but otherwise stellar casting does improve the film somewhat. 4 out of 10.
The film frequently struggles to find a voice, but when it does, it excels in battle choreography and acting. This lends itself towards a younger audience, but the mature nature of the violence directs it closer to teenage viewers who might not be so critical of the film's shortcomings as more experienced moviegoers tend to be.
That looks like, all done from us. Thanks for watching, and we'd love to see you...
Who are you people? What are you doing in my house?